Hi.
I love the finale. I don't care what J.R.R. Martin says.
Thank you.
I just was wondering, when did you finally figure out what the purpose of the island was? How early did you have the ideas of what finally became the finale? Where did that start, and did it end up like you had hoped?
This is not being evasive, but I think that there are certain parts of, David Copperfield, How Did You Make the Statue of Liberty Disappear? That would be, that if I were to tell you it, would sort of rob it of its magic. But in a more general sense, I can say that from very, very, very early on, I think probably by time we finished shooting the pilot, or certainly by the time that the show got picked up, JJ and I and Brian Burke had a conversation that no matter what happened, that the ending of the show would be Jack dying. So opening to the show is eye opening, ending of the show is eye closing. So that the idea that we were eventually going to end there, and then that attached to that idea was, well, Jack should die in some very, very noble way. And saving somebody's life is going to be lame because he's been doing that. He did that in the pilot. How profound of a sacrifice can he make? It kind of has to be on a level of Spock in Wrath of Khan, where he goes into the room and he's getting irradiated. And so that conversation happened very early on. So subsequent conversations, as the series went on, were sort of like, well, what could possibly, what could Jack die for? And the answer sort of revealed itself probably towards the end of season 1, when he and Locke have this conversation going out to the hatch in the finale with their torches, and it's the man of science, man of faith speech, and basically Jack sort of puts it all on the line and says, like, I don't believe in destiny, I don't believe that there's anything special about this island whatsoever, I'm completely sticking to reason, and so we're like, let's if that's his starting point, we have to take this guy to a place where he's willing to die for this weird island. He has to accept that all of this was predestined and that he plays this huge part in it. And it can't be something, Morpheus can't come to him and say, you're the one, Neo. He has to have an opportunity at some point to choose to be the one. So the 6th season became an expression of those ideas, and Jacob became our Morpheus, in terms of saying, he's going to be the guy who says, hey, look, I'm dead, and if anybody wants to be the new protector of the island, they get to choose it now, and then Jack will choose it, and then he'll end up dying as a result of it. That stuff was in the DNA. We were having those conversations, certainly, between the 2nd and 3rd seasons of the show. And again, just in the spirit of complete honesty, because the battle to end the show was so hard fought, it was hard to have the conversation about how to end the show, because it really felt like they would never ever let us do it. And there was no precedent in television for a successful show announcing its own cancellation 3 seasons out, unless it was a cable show. So it was hard to really go down, how are we going to end Lost, down that road until they said we could. So hopefully that's satisfying.
Go up here in the front.
As someone who worked on some earlier Star Trek iterations, I have to ask you about the upcoming movie. Hollywood has a tendency, especially if something is a success, to want to do it bigger the next time. And especially in terms of Star Trek, if you think of the motion picture going into Wrath of Khan is much better regarded, and it's a much smaller movie. It's a story about relationships. And I'm wondering if you're getting pressure to go bigger next time when maybe your inclination is to go smaller, or just more importantly, go better.
That's a great question and very insightful. And I think that there is certainly, whether it's coming from the studio or it's coming from the audience, sort of an expectation that the second movie, a sequel, is going to be bigger. It's just, what does the word bigger mean? And I would actually argue with you, and let's argue about it, but not in front of all these people, and say that Wrath of Khan is so much significantly huger than Star Trek the Motion Picture, where on a production level you're absolutely right, and on a thematic level in terms of what's at stake, you're absolutely right. But at the end of the day, the ideas in Wrath of Khan are so much bigger. In the same way that, you know, if you look at Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, The Dark Knight is certainly regarded as the bigger movie, but just in terms of the globetrotting that happens, and this is Batman's origin story, and the first time you would think that, you know, they should be on par, but the idea of, okay, we're introducing the Joker in this one, and when you think about The Dark Knight, the scenes that come to my mind are like the interrogation scene, you know, very, very small scenes, small moments between characters, and the sort of like, did Two-Face need to be in that movie? Like, I'm not sure, like, but maybe in a sequel you always feel like you have to have two bad guys. All of these conversations, none of them have been instigated by the studio. They're all coming from Bob and Alex and JJ and I in terms of, wow, it's amazing. You actually can know the cautionary tale. It's the old thing of like, you know how we would go to the movies and you and someone hears a noise in their attic and you're like, why are you going to check out that noise? Like at 3 a.m, like 2 nights ago, I heard a noise downstairs and I just was like, I'm gonna go check that out. Like, you just, so what I'm trying to say is, even though you know not to do it, sometimes you end up doing it anyway. So we're trying to keep ourselves in check, and I think that that with Star Trek, which by the way is, you can't even say the word canon in it's almost like there's a kind of biblical approach to that source material in terms of its fans, of which we count ourselves, but at the same time we've now introduced this new body of fandom into that movie. So it's the idea of saying, and in the to use the remix allegory from earlier, we were like, what if you did Trek like Star Wars? You know, that idea of, you know, Kirk's Tatooine moment is going to be looking up at the Enterprise being constructed as he's leaning over his motorcycle, and you're going to go, that seems familiar. But, you know, we're just going to take those, let's take Star Trek and make it as an action movie, and have a lot more fun with it. But again, Trek is all about the character relationships and the themes that are still so pervasive, you know. And the thing that's so unique about it is this idea that the future is an optimistic place. I mean, think about The Walking Dead, and I know I'm going off on a tangent right now, but it's a huge success. It's a massive like ratings phenomenon, and it's a zombie show. And so, but I think that it's really connecting with this idea of that our belief on what the future looks like is very bleak. So all these, the way that we look at the future, the Terminator movies, the Matrix movies, like, you know, it's just an apocalyptic world is a foregone conclusion in sort of in our vernacular, except for Star Trek. And so I think that as long as we hew close to the sort of ideals of it, hopefully we won't screw it up too bad. But then again, we are having that conversation of, should we do that? Absolutely not. Let's do it. Like on Trek too, because I think people are expecting for us to take risks.
Let's do 1 or 2 more, then we'll go over here.
I'm going to have shorter answers, I promise.
In regards to Lost, you guys did a very cool thing with a story arc where you like continued stories through like mobisode episodes and the books Back Twin or websites like Find Christianity 15. Where did that idea come from?
This goes back to the sort of Orson Welles of it all, and another story that I like to tell very briefly. My parents brought me to Six Flags when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and they have a diving show at Six Flags. And as soon as you sit down, there's people like just sort of like doing dives off of, you know, the boards that are up like 15 feet and they're doing flips and shit. But there's like this huge ladder up and like a massive board up there. And if you're a 7-year-old kid, you're just staring at that tall one going like, when is somebody gonna jump off of that thing? And so they did their dives for like half an hour, and then the guy basically comes out and he's in his and he says, ladies and gentlemen, normally we end the show with doing a dive off there, but it is just way too windy today. Very, very dangerous. We're just not going to do it. And this guy stands up right behind me and goes, what are you, chicken? And I'm like... And the guy's like, sir, please, you know, we have to worry about... And the guy's like, I can make that dive. And I was like, and he's like, sir, I would not advise that. Our divers are professional. And the guy's like, no way. And he stomps down out of the audience and he starts climbing up the ladder, and the guy with the mic is like, sir, please. And I was like holding on to my dad's arm, and my dad's like, and so, and the guy goes all the way up, he rips off his jumpsuit, he's wearing a Speedo, and he does fucking 9 flips and executes a perfect dive. And even then I wasn't like, he's a shill. I was like, that guy was right behind us. So this sort of instilled in me this nature of, like, let's make the audience part of the show. We control the show, but by sticking that guy in the audience, you know, we basically can sit, you know, we create this sort of sense of participation. And so for a television show, there's no audience sitting in front of the diving boards, but now the internet exists. And so how can we start to create this moment of, what are you, chicken? And the first idea was like, let's make a fake commercial for Oceanic Airlines and just stick it in the finale. Like, because it'll just help bolster the reality of the show. Because the audience knows there's no such thing as Oceanic Airlines, but wouldn't that be cool? And we pitched it to Mike Benson, who was head of ABC marketing at the time, and he's like, that is a phenomenal idea. Here's the thing, we're selling 30-second spots for Lost for, like, during the finale for about $750,000. So, you know, how are you going to make it worth our while? And we're like, well, what if the commercial, like, had a phone number at the end of it, and when you called the phone number, it, like, went to a website, and the website had cool Lost information on it, but you could get, like, some corporate underwriter to basically, you know, you'd have to watch, like, a Sprite commercial or a Jeep commercial to actually watch this, and maybe that would launch this whole story that we're not going to be able to do on the show, that basically starts kind of setting up the events that might happen in season 2, because we, you know, we had already had the idea for the Dharma Initiative and Alvar Hanso and all these things. So, you know, John Bernstein, who's here today, became a huge part of that conversation, what we started calling ARGs, Augmented Reality Game, of basically saying, like, let's start to create this fun experience for viewers of the show who want to get a Lost fix, but we can't generate the show fast enough to feed it. And, you know, we weren't always able to generate the most satisfying content because you have to outsource it, and we always had to keep our eyes on the mothership. But I think that was sort of that was where it sort of all began. And I wish that we could have done more as the show was going on. That would have been so cool. But just making the show itself became so consuming. And I think the next time, and this is something that Sean and I talk a lot about, certainly in the sort of realm of movies, the next time I undertake something like this, it would be so great to have all that stuff lined up at the same time that you're writing it, so that by time you launch the movie, you're actually sort of ready to give the audience the enhanced experience. And I don't think anyone has, there have been cool ARGs that sort of people who are in the know, like, kind of are attuned to, but nothing on the level of War of the Worlds. And that's coming. Like, in the next year or two, the entire country is going to be punked. Like, someone is going to do, you know, if Orson Welles could actually execute, you could figure out a way to scare the living shit out of people now. Like, the resources are there. It's just a matter of, what's that story going to be?
Okay, great. All right, let's do one last question, and then we will move on. I think there was somebody over here. Okay, great. Sure, yes, that's good news.
Can you talk a little bit about your breaking in story, about how you got your job as a writer's assistant and breaking into the writer's room, and possibly give some advice to myself and aspiring writers in the room about how that can relate to us now?
Sure. The first thing that I would say, and this is something that Carlton often says, and I echo, is, and I said it earlier, reading is the key, and not just books. But if you're an aspiring writer, if you want to write television, read a lot of television scripts. If you want to be a screenwriter, read a lot of screenplays, because it's a different process than actually watching a movie to read it. And the more of it you read, the more that your brain is going to start to kind of understand, this works, this doesn't work, sort of how can I emulate this. It's the equivalent of, if you want to be a guy who designs cell phones, you should take cell phones apart, you know, and look at them. And so that's kind of phase one, because inspiration actually comes from other people's work, especially as I talked about it earlier. In terms of my own story, as Sean kind of outlined, when I graduated from film school, I felt like I'm 21 years old. There's no way that I have the talent and the skill and the experience necessary to be a working writer. So I'm going to treat the first 4 years that I'm in LA as my grad school, and I'm just going to try to understand how the industry works. But while I'm doing that, I'm going to continue writing. And so over the course of those 4 years, I probably wrote like 7 or 8 complete screenplays, all of which were terrible. But every time I wrote one, and I think that here's another piece of advice. I know so many aspiring writers who are just working on the same script 2 years later. And I'm just like, let it go, man. Like, let it go. Work on the next one. If you want to come back to it in a couple years, that's fine. But it's essentially like, I did that, I'm moving on. And so I kept writing bad material. And then finally, at the end, when I wrote the 8th script, I was like, this one sucks, but not as bad as the other ones. And I'm going to submit it into a screenwriting competition just to sort of get a sense of where it will land. And there's this thing called the Nicholl Fellowship that the Academy sponsors, and they accepted like 4,500 scripts into the competition. And I got a letter saying, you've made the first cut, which was down to 1,000 scripts, and then a letter saying you've made it down to the second cut, which was 100 scripts. And I was like, okay, so my script is in the top 100 scripts out of 4,500 scripts. I'm going to make my move now, because the next letter I get say I'm going to be out, and I'm going to read that letter, and I'm going to be completely and totally disheartened. So why don't I take this as a win, you know, top 100 out of 5,000, you know, I'm rounding up just to feel even better. I'm going to take that as a win, and I sent out an email to everyone that I'd met over the course of the 4 years and said, I want to be a writer. I am not ready to write yet. I want to do it. I want to be targeted. I want to do it in television, because movies very, very, very hard to break through. But from what I understand about TV shows, every single show on the air has like 7 or 8 different writers working on it. I'm really good at collaboration. I really like television. I feel like I can write anything. I can write, you know, crime dramas. I can write, you know, Buffy. I can, all these shows that I'm watching, I feel like I could have something to contribute. But I understand that I have to start at the ground level. So I will get coffee. I will do your dry cleaning. I will wash your cars. Just, if you know anybody who can give me a job like that, I will take it. And my friend Julie Pleck, who was working with Kevin Williamson, started working with him on Dawson's Creek, is basically producing his follow-up to Dawson's Creek was this thing called Wasteland. And she emailed, it was on a Thursday that I sent this email out. She sent me an email on Thursday night saying, we have a writer's position open on Wasteland, but you have to start on Monday. And so I just read it, and I was like, don't think about it, Damon, just do it. And I walked into my boss's office and I said, you know, I'm giving you my notice. I'm sorry, it's such short notice, but I've got to leave. And he said, don't worry, this job will be here when it doesn't work out for you. And he was being very nice, but then I was like, oh, you. That served as even greater motivation. So that was my break, and I started as a writer's assistant on Wasteland, and I was in the right place at the right time, and had the right ideas, and got promoted there. And I think that I could have just as easily been fired, because all the other writers were getting fired, and it was not a very organized show, because Kevin was directing a movie for New Line, still working on Dawson's Creek, and trying to launch this new show. And so they were running out of scripts, and everybody was getting fired. So about 2 weeks before, I was like, when we finish shooting this script now, there are no scripts behind it, so I'll write one. And maybe they'll be so desperate that they'll shoot it. And that's exactly what happened. So, you know, they gave me a job on the show, and then, as Sean said in my bio, therefore I said it, the show was canceled like a month later. So, you know, and then, you know, just to, yes, I did get the letter, you know, 2 days after I started that job, you have not advanced any further in the So, and I was disheartened, but, you know, I'm glad that it timed out that way. So I would say, like, you know, try to look at the glass as half full when you get a positive piece of criticism, because there's always negative criticism right on the other side, and that'll always be, you know, it'll be debilitating, because it's really, really hard. I think it's such a personal thing, writing. When someone doesn't respond to your material, it's very easy to go to the place of, I suck, I'm untalented, why am I doing this, I have to give up. You just have to sort of meditate on the part of you that's like, this is what I have to do. Not meant to do, like, let's not get all spiritual about it, although I'm a spiritual guy, but you just keep telling yourself, this is what I have to do. That's what separates the people that I know who are successful from the people who aren't.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank all of you for thanks for coming out for the conversation on innovation, and I'd also another round of applause for one of our great innovators.
Thank you all for being here. Have a great day.
Great.